Good afternoon, everyone. Once again, this is David Searns from Haley Marketing, and welcome to today's Lunch with Haley event. Today, I am broadcasting to you live from the 2018 Bullhorn Engage Conference in Boston, Massachusetts. So a very big staffing industry event. I guess there's nearly 1,000 people here for this conference. I'm really pleased that you're here listening to me. I am missing Captain Sully, the infamous pilot who landed the plane outside of New York City, who is now speaking at a keynote at this conference right now. So I don't know if I'll replace Captain Sully, but hopefully today at least I'll give you a few good take-home ideas on how to position your staffing company. And that's what we're going to talk about for the next hour. Is one of the biggest challenges in our industry is how do you really make your services stand out? We're in an industry that has a total of, according to the American Staffing Association, 17,000 companies just in the United States, and 17,000 companies that are providing temporary staffing, temp to hire, direct hire. I mean, we may call it different things, maybe contract staffing, maybe staff augmentation, but we have 17,000 companies basically doing the same things. Now, we may specialize in different skill disciplines, so we may not all be direct competitors, but there's a lot of companies out there in every single market in the United States that are basically saying the same things. Have you caught anybody on your team when you're talking about what makes you different, focusing on things like, well, we really listen, or we ask better questions? We really focus on building relationships with our clients or with our candidates, or some variation of our service is the best. It's no surprise that when you're in a service business, a lot of companies are going to attempt to differentiate on service. But if you just use service as a whole, it doesn't make you stand out. And I want you to think about that. Think about the companies or the stores you buy from that provide the absolute best service, and you love them and you're incredibly loyal. Maybe it's Amazon because they deliver everything to you the next day. They provide great service. The service is the differentiator once you're a client, but before you're a client, that great service will not really help to differentiate your company. It may help get you word of mouth. It may help when someone does a reference check, but to get that first appointment, that's not what's going to make you stand out. And the problem when you have a lot of companies saying similar things is that to the buyers of staffing, we all start to look alike. I want you to picture yourself being in human resources, and this week you get 10 calls from staffing companies in your market promising to do a better job for you, promising to be able to find the talent the other vendors cannot, promising to have a better process for screening talent, promising to somehow provide better service or build better customer relationships. And if you heard this message over and over and over again, eventually it'd be like this picture on the screen. Everything would be vanilla. And you'd start to think that every staffing company is the same. So I want everybody, as we go through today's presentation, to really think about how to drill deeper into your differentiation. We're going to talk about positioning. We're going to talk about all the elements of positioning, and you're probably going to need to challenge some of your thinking. There are no easy answers in terms of how to differentiate a staffing company. It takes hard work. It takes focus. It takes process changes. It takes a lot of commitment and great management. It's not simple. However, if you don't want to be painted with the brush of you're all the same, we have to learn how to make our business seem different. And if we don't do that, when we start talking, this is what our prospective client hears, yada, yada, yada. Their fingers are in their ears. They're not listening. They're not paying attention. And the worst thing for you is you walk in the door already dealing with a customer who has a preconceived notion about what you're going to say, about the value you're going to try to deliver, about what you do. And if that preconceived notion is negative, or that preconceived notion is even just not as positive as you want it to be, you're creating a situation in which it's very hard to sell. And right now, when it's very hard to fill job orders, it's also very hard to sell to the candidates. It's very hard to get them to see a difference from one staffing company to the next. And also, as we talk about positioning, it's not even just about all staffing companies looking alike. It's about all staffing companies looking badly, because a lot of really good job seekers don't understand the value our industry can deliver, and they don't appreciate the great jobs that you have to offer and the support you can provide to them in their careers, and we want to change that. So what is positioning? Now we're going to go through, and I'm going to repeat some things as we go through the presentation, really deep dive into understanding this word that means positioning. When we talk about positioning, when I train our clients and we do coaching lessons for our internal staff members about what is positioning, we try to build mental pictures in people's minds, and there's two analogies that I want you to think about as we go through today's presentation. The first analogy is really simple. I want you to think of a pie chart. So every pie chart you've ever seen is broken into sections, and each one of those sections represents something. When you think about positioning, what we're going to be doing is really pointing at the section of the pie that's all yours. And the rest of the pie, it's not that you'll never service a client who's out there somewhere in the rest of the pie. They're just not your core focus. They're not what you want to be known for. And this whole discussion of what is positioning, the biggest mistake that I see companies make every single week is they're afraid to give up the incremental sale, meaning they don't want to define the slice of the pie they own for fear of giving up the rest of the pie. But one time I placed an IT person, so we should have IT staffing on our website. Or I know we do mostly light industrial, but I've done some senior level executive positions, so I should have executive search in my light industrial company. When you start to make the pie sound like we do all things to all people, you're absolutely going to come off as being vanilla. So that first analogy is what I want you to think about, is what's the slice of the pie that you're going to define, you're going to own. The second analogy I want you to think about, we'll talk about this one later, but it ties to positioning and branding. So if I said to you, I want you to go to your local supermarket and get me a box of Cheerios. Now, those of you who don't grocery shop, this may not apply to you, but for most people on today's call, you can mentally right now close your eyes and walk into your local grocery store. You know exactly what aisle the cereal is in. You already knew that Cheerios was a form of cereal. You know about where in the aisle to find Cheerios, because you know it's going to be at eye level, and you know there's going to be a big yellow box right in front of you. And that's positioning. So Cheerios is positioned as a cereal. That's the category of product they're in. They're located in a specific aisle in the store. You know where they play. You know where to find them. They're at a certain spot on the shelf. And when your store reorganizes things, sometimes it feels like you're completely lost because you already knew where to find things. And you know what Cheerios looks like. You already understand the brand, the value, and the positioning. So when we talk about what is positioning, the first thing you need to work on is what you are and what you are not. And in staffing, there's a lot of things we can be. So the most obvious thing we can be is we can be a staffing company. So that means I can walk into an HR manager's office and say, I'm a staffing company, and that HR manager, just like the Cheerios, they already understand what staffing is. They understand where staffing fits in their business. They already have a pretty good understanding of the potential value you can provide. So when you walk in and you describe yourself as something they understand, that's good because you already occupy a shelf in their mind, just like Cheerios occupies a shelf in the store. But maybe you don't want to occupy the shelf that's really crowded. There's a lot of cereal boxes, and there's even more staffing companies. So maybe I don't want to define myself on that shelf. So in defining what you are, maybe I want to be, as you've seen most of the big national companies redefine themselves, a workforce solutions provider. Or maybe I want to be a consulting firm. A management consulting firm is nothing more than a staffing firm with 300% markups. They do what you do. They just charge a lot more for it because they've defined the business they're in differently. So step one of your positioning is to define what business we are in. Is it staffing? Is it workforce solutions? Is it consulting? Is it talent acquisition? Is it something else? You can create a something else that's your own unique shelf, something that only you own. And that's a great way to do positioning because you're highly differentiated. But I'll warn you, because while that sounds great, there's also a risk. When you position yourself on a shelf somebody already understands, the cereal shelf, people already know they need your services. Now you just have to sell them on why they need you. When you create a new shelf in someone's mind, now you have to convince them why they need that shelf. And when people are super busy, like most HR managers, it can be hard to have the time to do an educational sell to get them to see the value of that shelf. But the first decision you're going to have to make is what you are versus what you are not. Second decision is where you play and where you don't. So where you play can be as simple as geography. We're a staffing company that focuses on Boston, Massachusetts. You may have different answers for where you sell versus where you service. I often talk to IT staffing companies and I'll say, well, where do you guys service? What's the geographic market you play in? And they'll say, well, it's the whole United States, or it's the US and Canada. Some will even say it's global. But then I'll follow up saying, well, I'm assuming you recruit for your clients in all those areas, but where do you really sell? Because for most of you, where you're playing is primarily where you sell. The exception to that being when you need to recruit in other markets, then you need to figure out how I'm going to have a recruiting presence in those markets. But figuring out where you play is really critical because it allows you to focus your marketing resources. And the broader the where you play, the more it costs to make yourself known. The more tightly you define where you play, the easier it is to stand out. So now we've talked about who you are, where you play. The next one is who you serve. And this is sort of tied to where you play, but it's thinking about who is our ideal client. Now, if I said to people on today's call, what companies in your local market use staffing services, the answer is probably almost all of them. And if they don't all use your services today, they absolutely could use your services. So everybody's a prospective client. But if you try to serve everybody, you stand out to no one. So you want to think about who's our ideal client. What size companies are we really best at serving? I've had a lot of very small staffing companies who said, if we could just get one big account, we'd be all set. And that's a terrible strategy because that one big account, number one, you probably as a really small company don't have the resources to be a good vendor to them. And even if you can get them, you're now so dependent on that one account that if you lose them, you're going out of business. And we've seen this happen to staffing companies where they're too dependent on just a handful of key accounts. So the who you serve says in the marketplace, what size companies, what vertical markets, what industries, and then within those companies, what decision makers? Do we only call on HR? Do we call on purchasing? Do we deal with the line managers? Do we deal with frontline supervisors? And I'm sure you're tempted to say, David, we sell to all of those people. And yes, you do sell to all of them, but who's your ideal customer that you really want to have the sales conversation with? Is it the hiring manager? Is it someone higher level? Is it someone who's just a lower level frontline supervisor? Or is the sale really going to be made in human resources? And that's who you serve. Because when you come up to figuring out the other aspects of positioning, we'll get to your differentiators and your value proposition, it's tied to who you serve. And the wider the number of people you serve, the greater the number of people you serve, the harder it is to define a value that matters to all of them. And I love this last one. This comes from Jim Collins, Good to Great. He described it as the hedgehog, the thing you can kind of curl yourself up in a ball and you own it. So it's where can you be the best in the world? So if you look in your market, in your area of specialization, for the clients you serve, where can you be the best in the world? Where can we define a segment of the staffing industry that no one else has an opportunity to take from us? Or very, very few other companies can compete with us. Is it on a level of quality? Is it on how fast you respond? Is it on your skill expertise? Is it on your knowledge of a specific market or type of business? Where can you be the best in the world? If you're a general staffing company serving a small community, it may be in your knowledge of that community. I know we worked with a company in Southern California that they are the best in the world at knowing people who are financial professionals in Southern California. They're not the biggest financial staffing firm in Southern California, but their differentiator is knowing the talent pool better than any of their competitors. And that's what they put a ton of effort into, is really knowing the people in the database, really knowing the people in the community. There's almost no limit to the areas where you can be the best in the world, but you have to pick the things you can truly own. So I've got a picture frame on here, and the adage is a picture is worth 1,000 words. But we're not talking just about a picture, we're talking about messaging. And great messaging is worth 1,000,000. And for a lot of people, it's worth 100 million or more. And when I say great messaging, positioning is one element of messaging. And we're going to talk in just a second about the other elements of messaging, because they're directly correlated to how you position yourself. And having the right messaging is absolutely critical if you want to, A, get someone's attention in a sales process, B, get them interested in wanting to talk to you, and C, have conversations that aren't instantly positioning you as a commodity. So what goes into messaging? When we do marketing strategy, the very first thing we do is we do messaging. And great messaging is built on a company's mission, core values, and vision. So think about the things that your organization is fundamentally all about. The core values are the lines in the sand we won't cross no matter what. I want my messaging built on top of those values, and I want it built towards the mission of the organization. I want a mission that really excites people, that motivates people, that makes people want to work with us. Like Google has a mission of organizing every piece of information on the planet. That's a pretty motivating mission. So you want to create a mission of what you're delivering as value to your clients, to your candidates, to your internal team members. What's the mission that gets people excited? Because that's going to be the basis for creating this messaging. And the first aspect of messaging is key differentiators. So you're going to look at your company's strengths in terms of your capabilities, your experience, your technology, your service processes, your access to talent, and you're going to try to identify things that are your key differentiators, places where you can stand out. Then you're going to look at your company's value proposition, and we're going to look at key differentiators and value proposition in a lot more detail in just a few minutes. But value proposition is essentially flipping differentiation on its head and saying to that ideal customer that we just defined, the company and the individuals we serve, what's the value we're delivering to them? How are they going to measure our services against the competition? And how are we going to prove that we deliver a value that's so far superior to anyone else that companies can't envision using an alternative to our services? That leads into the positioning message itself. And we're going to go through this in more detail, but if the positioning message identifies three things: who we are, what we do, what makes us different. And that's a statement that everybody in your organization should internalize, so that anytime someone asks them for their elevator pitch, they instantly know the who we are, what we do, and what makes us different. And you're describing it, just like we talked about earlier, in words that either position you in the aisle, like the cereal that people know, or position you in something they don't know but are curious to learn more about. And the last aspect is core story. Now, we're not going to get very far into core story today. If you are interested in how to craft a core story, we actually did a lunch with Haley, I think about 2 years ago. You can go to our website, lunchwithhaley.com. You can go to the on-demand webinars, and you can do a search for core story. And you'll find that webinar, and we spent a whole hour talking about how to craft a core story. But what that story is it's a compelling tale. It's something that's going to get people to want to listen to you, to be interested in the kinds of problems you can solve and value you can deliver. It's not a sales pitch. It's typically educational. So you're teaching something to your audience that they'd find very valuable, and then your services are sort of the hero of that story that help to solve the problem. All right, so key differentiators. When we say key differentiators, what does that really mean? So again, you're looking at places where you can be better than the competition. And usually when we think of differentiation, we think, where do we outperform the competition? That's one way to look at it. In staffing, so much of what we do is a service that's hard to judge, that just being better at something is really hard to prove. So if we're going to say our service is better, how do we measure it? Our service is better because we have a faster time to fill. Our service is better because we have a lower submission to hire rate. Our service is better because we have a lower fall off rate, or we have less turnover. Our service is better because we measure productivity and we're able to increase productivity at a higher level than the competition. So with key differentiators, when you're thinking we're better than the competition, you also have to be thinking, how do we prove it? How do we measure it and prove that we're better than the competition? But your differentiation doesn't have to be better. It could be about being different. So we have a service model that's completely unlike anything you've seen before. If you look at this whole gig economy, companies like Uber didn't come in and say, we have a better taxi. No, they said, we have a different way to solve transportation problems. Companies like Upwork are coming after staffing companies, and they're saying, we have a better way to help businesses get work done. So you can look at your key differentiators, and what I recommend everybody on today's call to do, and I'm going to show you in a slide coming up, a list of lots of potential differentiators. I recommend that everybody gets together with their team and you brainstorm in a room in front of a whiteboard or a flip chart. What are all the places where we can beat the competition? Where are we better and where are we different? Make a list of all those things. Key differentiators are where you refine it down to the top 3 to 5 things that matter most to your clients, and we'll talk more about that in just a couple minutes. I mentioned value proposition is how you flip key differentiators on their head. So the fact that you're faster is great, but why does that matter to a customer? So if you look in the customer and you think about what they need to do, or you think about the candidate who's trying to get a job and what they're trying to accomplish, how does your differentiation translate to greater value? Does it translate to lower cost? Does it translate to more revenue production? Does it translate to greater peace of mind? Does it translate into greater job satisfaction? What is the value you're delivering, and how do you put it in terms that your customer sees that value? And one of the adages in the marketing world is that in order to get a customer to switch from one brand to another or one staffing company to another, the value of the new company coming in needs to be 10 times greater than the value of the company that's there, because there's a lot of costs, physical costs, mental or emotional costs, business risks to changing vendors. So if I don't see a significant value, I'm not going to change something for just a little better. Think about your applicant tracking software. You may love it, you may hate it. Most people are somewhere in the middle. And you stick with what you're using because the pain of switching is so great. Well, for your clients, the pain of switching staffing vendors is so great. And if your value is not dramatically better, they're not going to switch. Now, part of your value could also be making it much easier to switch. Take away that risk, take away that pain, and make that part of your value proposition. The positioning message itself, as I mentioned, is those 3 things. Who we are, that defines the type of business we're in. We're a staffing company, we're a workforce solutions company, we're a talent acquisition specialist, we're a manufacturing consulting firm. Then it's defining what we do, which can be specifically, we provide temporary staffing, temp to hire, direct hire. We provide proactive workforce management solutions. You're looking for a language that describes what you do in a way that helps set you apart from what they hear from everybody else and is understandable and or interesting to the prospect. So if I'm selling to a VMS, I want my what we do to be really simple. It's we're about filling temporary orders fast, great talent at a very low cost or affordable price. If I'm selling high value services, high level engineers, well then it's probably not just about temps. It's about We provide talent solutions to engineering firms to enable projects to get done on time and on budget. And I've sort of transitioned also to that last aspect of what makes us different. And that's where you're going to take your key differentiators and list them. And right after you list them, you're going to list, here's the reasons we can prove we're different. So the positioning message itself encompasses the key differentiators, the value proposition, all in one statement that will make sense to people inside your organization, make sense to people outside your organization. Now, if you decide to pick a positioning message that's not in a shelf that people understand, then your positioning has to probably be around a problem the client has. We are the best in the world at solving the problem of turnover through innovative talent acquisition strategies. We are the best in the world at helping manufacturers run more efficiently by eliminating waste in their staffing function. So again, positioning is about that who we are, what we do, what makes us different. Again, the last part of the messaging, as I said, was that core story. And I'll give you an example, because I talked about how it's an educational message. So we had a client in the Carolinas, and they were looking for how to differentiate themselves. They're a mid-sized industrial staffing company, and they deal with a lot of manufacturers that are focused on lean manufacturing. So they understand the whole Six Sigma thing. They know how to eliminate waste. They're really good at it. But what they had seen is a lot of the manufacturing clients had taken lean manufacturing so far as to actually inhibit their ability to manage growth. And in fact, when we worked on their core story, it was all about the risks of becoming too lean. They even talked about it as a case of corporate starvation. So the core story was the business risk of being too lean. There was actually a phenomenal case study about a company that had gotten too lean and really negatively impacted their manufacturing abilities. Well, we wanted to use that case study as part of the core story, but as it turned out, that client, or the company written about in the case study, was a client of the staffing company, so we couldn't talk about him. But we could at least use the example of being too lean is a risk, so you need a staffing partner who understands lean manufacturing, and they position themselves as lean manufacturing experts who provide talent solutions. They didn't focus on just being industrial temp help. That's what they did. They focused themselves on being specialists in solving the problem of optimizing lean staffing. All right, so how do you differentiate your own company? How are you going to take this stuff home from today's webinar? Well, the most common differentiators in staffing are the ones I'd start with. Number one, skill discipline. Do we focus on clerical, light industrial, accounting, IT, healthcare, etc.? That's sort of like the most basic level of differentiation, but clearly not enough. Second is our industry or technical expertise. Do we focus on certain vertical markets like we do IT and healthcare? Or we do ERP professionals. So in IT, there's lots of very specialized. I know one of our light industrial clients, they specialized only in manufacturing, and then they got to the point where they stopped defining themselves as a staffing company because they started actually taking over running lines for their clients, actually providing manufacturing solutions, not staffing solutions, because their differentiation became their knowledge of manufacturing. The geographic location you serve, that's another really common differentiator. We're the best in Boston. So you want to have some sort of focus that can be location-based. And you can tie all these things together to get more and more explicit about the slice of the pie that you own. The next one I like a lot, client intimacy, the adage of we get to know you better. Now, in my introductory slides, I talked about the one, we listen, we ask better questions. That's not sufficient because so many companies say that. But client intimacy is a differentiator. So if you can get to the level of, in our systems, here's how we document the preferences of each client. Here's how we document the specific requirements of each hiring requisition for each client. Here's how we help our clients proactively plan ahead. So we're going to know when you have a hiring need before you have it, because we're that close to our clients. And it's hard to have that kind of a relationship, which is why client intimacy can be a great differentiator. Companies that talk about partnering This is really what partnering is all about, is being able to anticipate what your clients need because you know them so well, or being able to be a really proactive recruiting partner, so you are looking for the kinds of candidates they're going to want and providing them to them in advance of their hiring needs. The other side right now, this is really critical, is being candidate focused. Really looking at your candidate experience and thinking about how do we make it better. At the Bullhorn Conference this morning, I heard the comment made 3 different times: candidates hate the staffing industry black hole, or the recruiting black hole. So, that black hole means I submitted my resume and I don't hear from anyone. Or even worse, I came in for 3 hours of skills testing, paper applications, or filling out applications online in the office, interviews, drug checks, and nobody even tells me if they're going to hire me. No job offer, no nothing. So look at your candidate experience. Actually get in front of that whiteboard again and do a process map. Map out every touch point from the time the candidate sees a job on Indeed until they're at the end of their first assignment with a client. What are all the touch points you have? Who in the office touches those candidates? Where do the candidates interact with your organization? Where are they interacting on your website? Where are they interacting via email, via texting, via an app if you have a mobile app? Where are they interacting with your people on the phone or in person? Map out all those steps and then put yourself in the candidate's shoes. How could we make it easier? How could we make it faster? Are there things we can just get rid of because they're not needed? Are there things that we could make simpler to do? And if we can't simplify it and we can't get rid of it, how we could at least make it more entertaining? My favorite example of this is Disney World. So my family are Disney junkies. We've been there many, many times. And we tend to go when school holidays are, so we're there when it's really busy. And I hate lines. Everyone hates lines. You're going to have lines if you're at Disney at a busy time of the year. But Disney does a remarkable job of trying to keep you entertained and engaged as you're walking through something as awful as a line. And you might be there, I can't believe we do this, an hour plus for a 3-minute ride. But they're focused on making the experience better. And that's not by chance. Everything in the Disney park is scripted to deliver an exceptional customer experience. Now go back and look at your candidate experience. Is everything you're doing in every office with every individual planned out, choreographed to deliver an exceptional experience? So those are the top 5 differentiators. But I left one off. I left it off semi-intentionally. Service. I almost didn't want to put it on the screen. That's why I forgot to mention it right there. It's because it is one of the most common differentiators. But as I mentioned early on in this presentation, you can't just use service because it doesn't stand out. So if you're going to make service a differentiator, then drill into service. What about your service aspects are different? And if you need some ideas, this is the slide I was talking about where we have tons of things you could look at, and this is not an exhaustive list. We just did a little brainstorming with our team and said, where are areas that a staffing company might differentiate? And all of these are really subsets of service. Our speed, our accuracy, our consistency, the client experience, our unique expertise, our ability to be innovative and provide better solutions to problems. Those are all elements of service. But you can look at all the things on these lists, and what I'll caution you is don't pick all of them. I've had companies do that where we've given them a list like this, and they've checked off every single one and said, we outperform our competition in every one of these areas. Maybe you do, but your clients will never remember that, your candidates will never remember that, and your internal team members won't even remember it. So if you have a long list of differentiators, you want to pick the top 3 to 5 that really make you stand out. And that's what key differentiators are. It's the 3 to 5 that matter most to your clients. They have the greatest value, and you can prove that you're better than the competition. They can be based on your company's strengths, things you're just really good at. They can be based around common client or candidate problems. I mentioned turnover. That's one of the really common ones. But you can drill deeper. The one we're talking about too in lean manufacturing and being too lean. That's a different kind of problem. Candidate problem right now is being stuck in a dead-end job or having no one looking out for their career when they're busy just trying to get this week's paycheck. It can also be based on elements of your service process. As I was just discussing, break your process down to finer and finer segments till you can say, we are truly better on these elements of service that really matter to our clients. And again, you're figuring out what matters to your ideal clients. So in the beginning of this, you need to have already have identified who's our best client that we most want to serve. And now our differentiation should be built around what those companies want. And again, coming back to this message, which I'm going to say, I think at least 3 times in today's presentation, to challenge your team, where can we be the best in the world at what we do every day, every time, every assignment? Doesn't mean you won't ever make a mistake. It doesn't mean you won't ever have a fickle candidate who wasn't what you thought. But do we have the best process for dealing with things that go wrong? Do we have the best way to anticipate and prevent things from going wrong? Where can we be the best in the world? Because the companies that are the best in the world aren't just the best because of a specific quality they have. They're the best because they built their companies around where they want to be the best. They built their service processes around that. They built their feedback systems around that. They manage and they measure performance around the areas where they want to be the best in the world. And you're going to want to do the exact same thing. And that's why you also don't want to pick too many things that where we say we're the best in the world, because it becomes too hard to manage. So that positioning statement, let's break it down a little further. Number 1 was who we are. How do you define the business you're in? Staffing, workforce solutions, consulting, something else. How do you define what you do? The service you offer, where you offer them, and who are your ideal clients. That should all be combined into a sentence, 2 at most. And then what makes us different? These should be your top 3 to 5 differentiators. And this positioning statement is something that you should write out, that everybody in your organization should know. I don't care that they use the exact same words verbatim, but I care that they all understand the same meaning and it's close. And if you go to your website and you look at the About Us page and you see a mission statement or something that says who we are, that's 2 paragraphs long, no one's going to remember it. You need to make these things clear and concise. We recommend thinking about each of these bullets like a billboard. 7 words or less is ideal, 10 at the most. If it takes you more than 10 words to define who you are, to define what you do, to define the key bullets as to what makes you different, well, no one's going to remember it. So your positioning statement, again, to make it really clear, really concise, and valuable to the target audience. Now, mostly we've been talking about the target audience being clients or candidates. I know of one staffing company, just one, that their positioning is really around internal people. And they want to be the best place to work on the planet. They're the best in the world at offering jobs for people interested in staffing and recruiting. Because their view is, if we are the best place to work for staffing professionals, we will have the best staffing company. And this company had meteoric growth before they were sold off to a larger company. But they were so successful by having a positioning message that was focused on internal staff, not clients or candidates. So you have 3 different ways you can look at your positioning. You can have a client-focused positioning message. You can have a talent-focused positioning message. You can have an internally focused positioning message. You actually could have all 3 as long as different people in your organization were managing how the positioning is executed with clients, with candidates, with internal recruiting. But what we've talked about so far aren't the only ways to think about positioning. And so in doing research for today's presentation, I found some cool graphics online. One is doing a 2-dimensional analysis. So this one I found was doing a 2-dimensional analysis of computers based on cost versus quality. And you may argue with where these various computer manufacturers are on the screen, and the fact that it says Sony Vaio shows that this was an old graphic that I found. But Apple is high quality and expensive. You'll notice that most of the common PC brands are below the halfway point on the quality line. And the worst quadrant to be in is if you find yourself in expensive and low quality. So HP really doesn't want to be in that position. Although I'm doing today's webinar on an HP laptop, so I might argue that their quality is above the line. But anyway, you want to think about what are the dimensions of our service where we could compare ourselves to the competition. It could be quality and cost. It could be speed and accuracy. And you may want to just get out with your clients and interview them. Have your salespeople talk to clients. Say, when you measure staffing companies, what dimensions of service are most important to you? And then map yourself and your competitors on those dimensions. The next one I found was one that was about clothing, and it was performance clothing or athletic clothing, and companies that range from pure leisure wear to high performance gear, and from more fashionable clothing to tech clothing. So Speedo is considered a leader in performance and technology. That's why you see Olympic athletes wearing Speedo gear in the pool. Whereas the fashion brands are what people wear because they want to look good walking around town, but they're not focused on performance. And what you'll find interesting is a lot of the best known brands, Nike, Adidas, in the middle, that's actually usually not a great place to be because you're bundled up where you're not really known for anything. You're sort of just lost in the middle. And the strongest positioning of companies are at an extreme of the measurements that you use. So if I said, what is Speedo known for? Most people would know high performance swimwear. If you said, what's Nike known for? You'd say, well, just do it. You know their tagline. You know they make sneakers. You know they make clothing. You wouldn't really know if it's high quality. Maybe you like it, but you wouldn't really know if it's high performance. So they're sort of lost in the middle as a brand because they're not at either end of the spectrum. And when you look at the dimensions of service you want to measure against, where can you be the one who's the outlier, so good, so different from everybody else that you stand out? I like this other model because it's kind of a cool way to think about yourselves, your competition, and your clients. And so it's got three concentric circles here: what customers want, what you offer, and what the competition offers. And so if there's an alignment between what you offer and what customers want, that's your ideal positioning. That's your value proposition turned into the positioning message that you're going to deliver. If it's something customers want, but your competition is really better than you, okay, that's your competitor's positioning, and you're going to have a hard time beating them. The last one is if it's an area where it's something that you have something great to offer, your competition has something great to offer, but your clients don't care, then don't even think about it because it has no value to your customer. But where most of the staffing industry is in that orange, risky center segment. So you are delivering services your customers want, but it's just about the same thing that your competition offers. And what you want to do is figure out, are there things our clients want that can push us up into that green area that we are uniquely suited to deliver? I also like this picture, which looks at positioning versus branding. Now, we really haven't talked much about branding. I mentioned the word a couple of times today. But positioning is all about the rational value you deliver. And that's what today's conversation has really been all about. It's the expression of your company's strategy in precise phrases that convey your differentiation, role, relevance, value. Excuse me one second, guys. All right, sorry about that. I had something pop up on my screen and it took over my screen sharing for a second. Let's come back to the slide we were on and restart. Okay. So the other side of the equation is your branding, and branding is more the emotional. It's how you convey that same strategy in words, sounds, colors, design, imagery. So when you think about your website, your positioning comes through logically in the value proposition that you're offering, but your brand comes through in how you say it. Your brand comes through in how you show it. So they go hand in hand. It's why it has a yin and yang diagram. The branding is really the emotional delivery of the rational positioning, and the positioning is the rational explanation of the emotional brand. And this last diagram, I just liked it because if you have a teenager at home, and particularly a teenage boy, you understand how positioning works because you see all of the shampoo, or in the case of certain teenage boys that I know, spray cologne advertisements, and the Attract Sexy Women is the one that gets sprayed all over your home and car. So, but the idea even with consumer products is they're all trying to come up with some value that helps set apart the commodity good or service being produced. And while the Axe cologne value is certainly what you're not going to use in a staffing company, you do have to think about the fact that I'm going in looking like every other bottle of shampoo. So how am I going to create that rational differentiation? And then how am I going to emotionally brand it to make us stand out? All right, got a little bit more on value proposition that we're going to talk about before we wrap things up. So value proposition, as I mentioned, it's turning positioning on its head. It's about what's unique, distinct, measurable in the value that you offer. So we can measure better quality talent in terms of potentially the output or customer satisfaction scores. We can measure time to hire to determine, are we really outperforming the competition in faster hires? We can look at the overall cost of hiring based on how long it takes to hire, the physical cost that the client has to spend on hiring, the amount of time a job is open and the cost to the organization of that. So we can look at how we physically lower cost of hire. If you do a direct recruiting or executive search, you can be actually delivering a lower cost than when they do things internally because of the length a job opening stays open and the cost of that job opening being open to the organization. If you took a middle manager or an executive and you figured out what their daily contribution to the organization is and multiplied it by the number of days it takes them to internally hire versus the number of days you hire, well, that difference, all the days you save and the value of every single hours in those days, that's part of the fee you're charging. But that actually may be much bigger than the fee you're charging. And lastly, you also may look at just providing fewer headaches. Your value proposition may be about making the staffing process easier, less painful, getting rid of, particularly if you're selling to HR, getting rid of the things that become problems for the HR manager. The one thing I want to tell everybody before we wrap things up today is don't say that our difference is, or our value is saving you time and saving you money, because that is so wildly overused. And if you don't believe me, watch TV, watch some commercials, read magazines and look at the ads. You will see some variation of save time, save money in so many ads in so many industries. It's just silly. Eventually you'll start laughing because it's so overused. So if you're going to think about saving time or saving money, you got to drill down deeper. Just like using service as a differentiator, you got to get to what it really means. And in staffing, one of the things that I love to teach people to do is to apply the 3-minute MBA. So on screen now, you see the formula for the 3-minute MBA. Now, a lot of you may know I went to graduate school, one of those big name MBA programs, and so spent a lot of money over 2 years to learn a few things that I still remember. But one of them is this 3-minute MBA. So here's I think the going rate at my alma mater is about $215,000 for 2 years now. So this formula is worth at least that to your organization, and it's R minus E equals P. And some of you have probably already figured out what the formula means. It stands for revenue minus expense equals profit, but it is the most critical marketing and selling formula there is. So you have to think about, how does your company help clients to drive revenue? And there's so many ways you do. First and most obvious is you help companies get more work done. Whether it's seasonal or supplemental help, you provide the labor they need, the resources they need, the expertise they need to get stuff done. You ensure coverage for vacations and leaves of absence so that companies aren't losing money by projects not getting done or having to pay overtime. So you are helping them accomplish more because they're not losing productivity. When you fill a job faster, that means more productive work is getting done because there's less days absent. You provide the resources companies need to meet deadlines, hit delivery dates. If you're in any sort of project-based industry, accounting, engineering, IT, those resources to meet deadlines are critical. With our staff, when we do training, I've talked about a company I know that They were a supplier to General Motors, and they had a penalty for being late on a delivery of $100,000 an hour. So using additional resources to hit a deadline was a no-brainer to this organization. In fact, in one case, they chartered a plane to get a delivery to GM on time because their factory was late getting some parts ready. So providing resources to meet deadlines can be a tremendous revenue driver and cost saver. Providing people to keep up with rapid growth. We're in a great economy right now, and you may have a lot of clients that can't meet their own demand, so you can provide people so they can get more done. You can also free key people to focus on more important tasks. Take people who are executives and doing administrative work and get them freed up to spend more time on executive work. Or take high-level professionals who are doing a lot of C&D level tasks and put in a junior person to support them to do the C&D level tasks. You maybe even have to outsource non-core tasks or departments. That company I mentioned in Charlotte that does manufacturing rather than staffing, they get to the point where they outsource entire lines for their clients. They take over manufacturing responsibility for clients. It started as staffing and has evolved over the years to really being a completely different type of business. You can provide specialized expertise to tackle critical projects, so you can shorten the learning curve for a new technology or process. You can also provide the resources a company might need to test a new product or launch a service line, test the new ideas. And you can do that either providing expertise, providing labor, or freeing the internal people so they can really focus on those new initiatives. We haven't seen a hiring freeze in a long time, but back in 2009, temporary help was a great way to get around a hiring freeze, so companies who had sections of their business that were doing well could continue to add people when corporate said we can't hire. They can improve service to customers. This is huge. A lot of companies are running very lean. They're having a hard time filling jobs just like you are. And one of the things that suffers is customer service. Well, great service gets you more customers. It builds word of mouth. I mean, with social media today, we're dependent on great service. So how do you provide the staff your clients need to improve service? That helps them drive revenue. On the flip side, let's look at reducing cost. So one of the things temporary staffing does is it converts fixed labor costs to variable. I can now match my workforce to my workload. Huge cost savings. I can eliminate all the times that I'm overstaffing. I can reduce my benefits expenses because I'm employing people for a few hours, or because I may be employing a larger percentage of the workforce as temporary workers as opposed to full-time people, and my cost of benefits for temporary workers is lower than that of full-time employees. I know there's some big manufacturing companies, General Motors used to do this, where their union people all had really high benefits costs. Their senior management had those same benefits, but everybody in the middle was outsourced through a staffing company because those benefits costs were double the markup the staffing companies were charging. You can eliminate overtime. So overtime is a big premium, 50% over the hourly rate. And if you're doing light industrial staffing or clerical staffing or any other hourly work, eliminating overtime can be a way to drive down an employer's cost of labor. Also reducing training costs. Hopefully you're providing people who are already trained, or maybe you're even doing some training these days to get people job ready so that you can help clients hire more productive workers in less time and get new hires up to speed faster. And of course, the obvious, reducing recruiting costs. There's the hard costs of recruiting and all the time it takes. If you ask any small business owner what they hate most about their job, they'll usually tell you hiring. And everybody on today's call, you're experts at it. So you're reducing a real cost of recruiting, what it costs to advertise and the time, and an emotional cost. Then there's workers' comp and unemployment. If you can help them reduce those costs, because basically as the staffing company, you're taking on the risk. You may be able to reduce payroll administration costs by taking over payrolling for companies, or just helping them outsource a larger percentage of their workers. You can help them increase operational efficiencies. This both drives revenues and reduces costs by making processes more efficient. And one of the reasons we exist is to help companies reduce turnover or the risk of a bad hire by making smarter hiring decisions, whether it's for a full-time hire in senior management or an hourly worker. We still want them to make better hiring decisions so that they have less turnover and less cost from bad hires. And of course, these days, who doesn't know about the legal risks of being an employer? All of your clients understand that. And so by working with you and partnering with you, they are avoiding some, certainly not all, of the legal risks. They're mitigating those risks, which reduces some of their costs of being an employer. But all value isn't logical. There's also an emotional side to this. So there's some emotional costs related to staffing. If I'm a manager in an organization and I can't get my work done because I'm short on people, that generates a lot of fear. And if you can come in and help me get rid of that fear, I want to work with you. I may have a fear of looking bad or failing at my job. I may have a pain in my organization or just because of the disruption of hiring or the pain of having unhappy customers because we're short on staff. Then there's the stress of having to discipline and terminate workers. It's a lot easier when I can call my staffing partner and say, hey, get them out of here. So there's all kinds of emotional costs that as a staffing partner you can eliminate, and you can show how you make people's lives easier, and that might be part of your differentiation, your positioning. There are positive emotions too, like giving people peace of mind, giving people the happiness of finding and employing great people they'd never find on their own because they don't have the recruiting skill that you do. They don't have the access to talent you do. Giving people a sense of trust. There's someone that has their back when it comes to hiring and vetting talent and managing people. And that last one is not really a positive emotion. Greed sounds like a really negative word, but people do things for greedy reasons because they personally want to be more successful. They want to run companies that are more profitable. And when your positioning plays, do we make your business more successful? That's a very positive emotion for the buyer, even though the actual emotion, we're using the term greed. All right, so how does this all translate into positioning? Let's tie this all together and wrap it up. So the 3-minute MBA in your positioning. People buy emotionally and then justify their decisions rationally. So when you're thinking about your positioning, don't just be logical. You're going to need to think about the logical reasons that your key differentiators enable you to outperform the competition, that you deliver economic value, but think about the emotional side as well. Negative emotions, be careful with them. They're awesome for grabbing somebody's attention. It's the reason that when there's a car accident, the opposite lane on the highway slows down because everybody has to look. But you don't want to position your business around negative emotions. I've seen companies that position all their sales around the risks of whatever the client is doing today, or even worse, the risks of working with the competitor that the client is using today. Negative emotions are great when you want to get someone's attention, but don't use them for your positioning. Positive emotions are about creating trust and likability, and that's what you want your positioning to do, is to create positive emotion so people trust you. The best positioning is a combination of logic and emotion. It's clear, 10 words or less, for who we are, what we do, what makes us different. It's easy for anybody in the organization to understand. You don't have to spend hours explaining it. You tell people the value, they instantly get it. It conveys great value, hopefully 10 to 1, to make people want to switch vendors. And it demonstrates a mix of warmth and competence. I have a friend who wrote a book called The Human Brand. And his book, they did a deep dive research with a professor from Princeton University looking at why people buy from companies. And this warmth and competence is what they learned. People buy from organizations that they trust to know what they're doing, competence, and that they like warmth. In staffing, we've always been a relationship-driven business. That's warmth. But there's always been competence as being seen as about equal among brands. So you want to be seen as a leader in the specific slice of the pie you serve in both warmth and competence. It's all about figuring out where you will be the best in the world at what you do. With that said, we've got a couple minutes left. If there are any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. And while we're waiting, if there are not any questions, we do have a couple of other events coming up. We actually have a lot of guest speakers coming up on our Lunch with Haley. And so our next one is going to be a partner profile. The people at Verified First, we are working with them because they have some really cool technology to make background screening easier. If you are in need of a new background screening vendor or just looking for new options, absolutely check them out because their technology is really unique. So we'll be doing that as our next product partner demo on Tuesday, June 19th. And then our next Lunch with Hilly is going to be a guest speaker. Two folks, Tricia Tamkin and Jason Thibault, who I had the pleasure of seeing at the NPA conference. And they talked about really unique ways to do sourcing, and they're going to teach some of their tricks for sourcing on Facebook. And before we wrap it up, the only other question we had come in was a couple people have asked about the slides and the recording. So today's event has been recorded, and like all events, it will be put on our lunchwithhaley.com website. It will be under the on-demand webinar section. You'll be able to find the recording, and you can always find the slides on the Lunch with Haley page. From all of us at Haley Marketing Group, I want to thank everybody for being part of today's call. Hope you enjoyed the presentation on positioning, and we look forward to seeing you at our next Lunch with Haley webinar.